My name's Les Smith and the shop is Barker Machine.
We would have brought the 428 sooner, but we didn't have one yet.
In business since 1947, and we've been in this location since 1952. I haven't been here that long.
We spent 3 months finding a date code correct 428 Police Interceptor to fill the engine bay of our barn find Shelby. This was early March. Paint done, assembly begun. A few weeks earlier,
it looks like the Lost Ark crate from Indiana Jones.
a big deal. Our dang old 428 had arrived.
How did you find this thing?
Guy that had it put an ad on Facebook.
So what's supposed to be in here?
It's the complete 428 Police Interceptor out of a Thunderbird.
How does this a Shelby engine run through that?
Well, the top end of it won't be used, so the valve covers, the intake, the heads. None of that's Shelby items.
Same engine Shelby started with, so just like Shelby did, we'll round up the parts.
The Shelby used the 2.4 aluminum intake, so that knocked a lot of weight off, better carburation.
The only Mustang ever to have multiple carburation from the factory. We had to find all this stuff. And you know what? Finding all that Shelby stuff, like the dual 4 intake and the oval air cleaner, it was kind of like a treasure hunt.
The base plate for the 2.4, it's a cast aluminum, got the correct PVC line for Shelby. It is an original piece. And then we have the...
all this original, no reproduction.
Which is an original one. It has the little notches for the wing nuts. Correct spacing of the letters. Fins coming all the way out like correct. And then we have an original 2.4 intake C7ZX with the Fomoco logo.
Only originals have this casting.
I wonder if this was on a Shelby.
Is there a date code on this?
No, they don't have a date code anywhere on them.
But how much lighter is that from, say, a cast iron 4-barrel?
This one's about 40 pounds. The iron one is 75 pounds. What benefits on these is not only are they aluminum intake, this part here is the head, so you have this much of the head in aluminum as well. So it knocks off a little weight altogether from the intake and the cylinder head.
So we found one for $1,500. This was $3,000, but
the one for $1,500 actually was just a short block, which is all we're going to reuse, but we can actually resell the heads, the intake.
what, we got the pistons down here and rods?
Yeah, he already took all that off and verified everything.
Jason had gone over all the parts with the seller.
Cut little individual spots for him in the foam.
For example, the pistons and the rods.
Are we going to use these pistons and rods?
The rods will reuse.
The Police Interceptor got the Le Mans rods.
Here we go, C6AE-C. This is the high performance Ford engine parts interchange. And on that particular rod, C6AE-C shows it is a Le Mans rod, which is what they used in Police Interceptor. These engines were produced for low-end torque. And if you have the original pistons still in the car, which is kind of rare, it does say 428 on the piston.
Wow, and that is what we had.
We can actually resell the heads, the intake. This PVC system right here, this tube, is worth about $300-400.
So we can recoup how much of our $3,000 then with the people?
We could probably sell most of that top end stuff, make probably close to $1,000 on it.
All of a sudden, I kind of felt like I was in the parts business. $1,500 for that oval air cleaner, $2,500 for the dual 4 intake. We'd never even seen a set of dual 4 Hollies for sale, original or reproduction. But first, Jason had to prove this engine is a 428 like Shelby used and date code correct for our car. Jason authenticated the block and date code.
Okay, now we got it out of the crate. There's one verification I'm going to make, and it says A scratch. That verifies that it is a 428. It's upside down. If it was a C scratch, which a lot of times over here, This looks like a C. That'd make it a Cobra Jet. One thing that's still there that's kind of a rare piece, it still has the tag. 428 tag, has the 67 date code and everything, so we can actually reuse that. That's an important piece that's usually gone.
428, the engine size. 67, the model year. 7 is the calendar year, and A is for January.
And this would be the exact build date of the actual engine.
Which is date code correct. 1 month before the car was assembled in February. Of course, the block would have to be cast before the engine was assembled.
And it is a 6J27.
September 27th, 1966, a Tuesday.
That's when this was cast.
That's when it was casted, which is a perfect date code.
So this is all lining up. Could have been in our car.
Yeah.
And none of these blocks were stamped with the VIN, so no matching numbers. Jason will disassemble the 428 Police Interceptor to pick out the parts that we need to take to the machine shop. Our GT500 won't need the intake, the heads, carburetor, exhaust manifolds, and other smaller parts.
So we got it?
We got it ready. We'll pull the lift plate off and start disassembling it.
So this thing, you say these sell really fast?
Yeah, you need that for any of the 390 or 428 Cobra Jet stuff. And they don't reproduce it. Luckily it has a distributor hold down. A lot of these little pieces like this, that's like $20, $30 with a distributor hold down. It's got the timing cover, crank bolt. A lot of these bolts, we could buy a complete engine bolt kit, but it's all mostly here. The only thing we'll have to buy is probably an exhaust manifold bolt kit. Not too sludgy. Here's our rocker arm assembly, all intact, all there.
What about the intake? Is it any of use?
It would work for a 390 GT car. They're a very, very common intake. The 390 GT car has a big S in this part number.
So what do you think here?
Looks as good as the other side. And these rocker assemblies are the same on every FE. There's nothing different, whether it's a 352, 390, 428, 427. They're all identical. If you notice, there's a seam right here. This part of the intake is part of the head. When you use an intake, the head is, your full head. This intake is part of the head. And when you put an aluminum intake on this, you actually gain a little bit of a head in aluminum. So you get that little strip right there, will probably equals out, say, 5-10 pounds of a head in aluminum, so you knock off a little more weight. And that's the benefit of putting an aluminum intake on these things.
The Shelby has an aluminum intake.
That's one of the main reasons they did that, is to knock the weight off.
You got to keep all those bolts.
Yeah, we'll definitely probably reusing most all of the bolts. Intake bolts, a few more slightly different on the Shelby intake, but head bolts, valve cover bolts, timing cover bolts, all identical.
You really get an education restoring one of these cars.
Yeah, the pieces you can and can't use and stuff that they change.
What's that?
This is the back fitting for the PVC, and none of these are used on the Shelby.
Same thing for that cast iron single 4 intake, which we'll try to sell. Clean it up, media blast it, and paint it.
Boy, that's heavy, isn't it?
Good 75 pounds.
Part number starts with C6, C for the 60s, 6 for 1966.
That's the part number, and right here should be the day code. It should be a 66. It should be real close to the same as the block. This piece here is the keeps the hot oil off of the bottom of the intake. It's a lifter galley oil pan, which most of the time you never use.
What are we looking at here?
It's the lifter galley. Everything looks good. He already pulled the lifters out. Here's the lifters.
Why did you do that?
Just to check everything out. He pulled the push rods, and when you turn the engine upside down, these fall out.
So if it was cracked, you could see some things here maybe?
I've never seen a FE really crack in here. Usually FEs don't crack. They're too strong. If they do crack, you're going to see it on the main webbing, and that's from performance use. And that's pretty rare unless you're really pushing one.
So now what?
Now we're going to pull the cylinder heads off.
What are we going to look for here?
After we get the heads off, we can measure the bore and make sure it's a virgin bore and that it is a 428 block. That's another verification to make sure that it's the correct bore. There's the original FOMO-Co head gaskets. So the heads have actually never been off of it, which is a good indication it never overheated or anything like that where they had to change a head gasket. So it's not 100%, but it's a good indication. Most times people don't use Ford gaskets, they just use store parts.
Shelby pulled those stock 428 heads and replaced them with 390 high performance heads from the new 1967 Mustang GT.
So we got the two heads. This is the one that's off of our motor, and this is a GT390 head. The GT390 head has a slightly smaller chamber, exact same valve size. The port size on the intake are exactly the same. The main difference is on the exhaust side. Port size are identical. You can see on the big car it has a bolt hole on the top and bottom. On a Mustang head, it has bolt holes top and bottom and side to side, except in the middle it don't have the bottom ones. Reason being is the exhaust manifold used GT390 manifold. And it has these side to side bolts, which won't work on the big car head. Now, the other manifold uses the top and bottom on one back port, which does have the bolts. So basically they use these heads to bolt these manifolds because these manifolds were designed to work in the Mustang. And these are the correct ones that I've found. They're date coded to the car. These are actually date coded, both of them, 67, very early 67. Late 66 is a November 14th of 66 on the date code.
That take the rust off too?
Yeah, takes the rust off, dirt, grime.
Now from the factory those were unpainted, right?
Yeah, they're bare cast iron.
Whoa.
Take an air blower and blow it off and it'll look even better. Pretty clean. It still needs a little detailing. And we got to dig out these tubes for the choke. Where these lines come out actually run up to the carburetor, and that's where the carburetor gets its heat to open and close.
So you can take a part that looks really old, make it look like new with inside that cabinet, huh?
Yeah, that cabinet's the #1 restoration tool you really need, you can use any kind of part in there, aluminum, steel, if you got pulleys, brackets, anything small that'll fit in there, you can blast it. You know, you got like a little bracket for an alternator, you can blast it, paint it. That one has already been done.
Oh.
That way you can save time instead of blasting them both. Now these I'm gonna acid wash and put a high heat coating on them to keep them from rusting. And then we'll flip it over and pull the pan, the crank out. These are the motor mount plates for the T-Bird. They're completely different than a Mustang. So these will actually just be thrown away. Reuse the bolts though. FEs, this has 4 bolts. The early FEs only have 2 bolts. That's a way you can identify the early ones. The early ones you cannot use in Mustangs because you have to have the 4 bolts for the Mustang motor mount. Now this freeze plug here will knock out, and behind this freeze plug should be 428 casted into the cylinder on the inside.
Has this oil been drained?
Yeah, the old one drained out of it. Crankshaft looks good. There's no galling or anything like that on it. And what we look for is on the crankshaft, the letter code, and it varies from where they put it. They just, right here it is. They usually stamp it. It has a 1U. 428 cranks are 1U, and that verifies that this is a 428 crank. The only other crank different is a 1UA, and that's a super coverage jet 428 crank. Now we'll pull this oil pump, and we'll take the mains off and pull the crankshaft out. This has some 9/16 headed bolts and some 1/2" headed bolts. Looks like I got some oil pan bolts mixed up with the timing cover bolts. We'll be reusing this piece.
On the Shelby.
It's an aluminum. These big screws here hold the cam plate in. This is a thrust washer for the cam. And I've actually learned this from experience. On the new cam, you do not put that back on the new cams, but that way. You'll waste the cam out. New modern cams are made with this thrust washer already on them. Actually, the timing chain has it on the back of it. And that's where you'll mess up, is if you take this piece off and you think, oh, I'll put that back on, you put that back on, and then you put a new timing chain assembly on there where you just double spaced it and you wipe your cam out. I learned that one from experience. So that right there you throw away.
Show me that real close.
The thrust washer.
Okay.
And on a modern one, goes right here on the timing. When you buy a new timing set, that's machined onto it. So if you reuse that and then it's on there, you just double spaced it.
Okay.
Another thing about the original timing set is they not only have that thrust washer, that was the timing set. The reason they don't have the thrust washer machined on there is it's an aluminum gear with a composite teeth. So the teeth are actually plastic. And they did the plastic teeth so that it would be quieter. The problem with the plastic teeth is they're worthless for performance. So as you can see, it's getting cracks in it from the heat. And it's cracks all the way around that thing. So you want to use a double roller timing chain. You'll gain a little power out of it, better timing precision, and get rid of this thing. If you're doing a concourse restoration, you think, oh, I'm going to use a concourse and you NOS timing chain, don't use that, because this thing will not last no time. It's a piece of junk. That happens. They'll get cracks, that plastic composite will break off, and it'll make your timing chain super sloppy. And then you could smack a valve with a piston. So those are total junk. And it's an easy mistake because you take that piece off and you think, well, it goes right back on. And I did that like 20 years ago on my 428, and I lost a cam in it. So then you got to pull it out and start all over again. I'll pull the crankshaft out now. I'm going to remove these mains. Okay, look at the bearings, the crank journal. It actually looks really nice right there. It's a pretty low mileage engine. You still see a lot of the first layer of bearing.
So did we get lucky?
Oh yeah, it's a really good motor. It's got a little bit of scratching in there from just not changing oil enough. That and the old oils weren't so great back then.
So we reused the crank, right?
Oh yeah, the crank easily. It probably just needed polish on it. So that'll save some money there on machine work. Just polish the crank. Now getting the back main out is one of the most hated things on an FE. They actually have seals and it drives down on the block. And they're hard to get those to seal as well. Usually you can kind of wiggle it right in here a little bit. These are usually really stuck in there. That doesn't want to budge. Get the other ones off. These main caps sit so down in the block, flush with your pan rail. You can't, most engines you just rock it and pull it right off. These are down in a hole, so it's hard to get the things rocked out. If you can get them up a little bit. That one's pretty wore there. It's down on the copper.
Really? What happened?
It's just wear. Like a good oil more than anything. Gonna budge anyway.
What are you trying to do?
I'm trying to get that rear main. Once I get it out, it has all the seals that hold it in and it doesn't want to budge. So they can be quite a pain to get worked out. There it goes. Okay. And they have a seal runs down the side of the main, seals it for oil. And then here's the rear main. And they're usually a rope seal still. And rope seal is actually a piece of rope. This is the rope seal. And it is actually a piece of rope is why they call it rope seal. And you have to soak these in oil and usually use a socket and you pack them in there and then you trim off the excess. The modern, and that's one of the things about going back to, you actually put a modern rubber neoprene seal back in these, which will seal a lot better. Same way with these side seals, will be actually a silicone based seal that has a pin that you drive down through them. And then on the new ones, they have a pin that goes down the center that you tap in with a hammer, and it expands the seal and seals it off.
That's both of them.
These are like probably just a rubber, like a gasket material maybe. But that's definitely an upgrade when you put in modern gasket kits. This is the rear main.
But this one have a rubber neoprene seal and it's not going to leak.
A modern neoprene seal. And it's good these are tight. You don't want them loose. And they are, each one is a numbered. They have to go back in the same exact spot. You cannot swap these out with another block. So if you buy a block that don't have main caps, it's trash.
So are you numbering these when you put them over there?
They're already numbered.
Oh.
Okay, the middle one here is called the thrust bearing, and it has a slightly different bearing. It has the thrust sleeves on both sides, and it actually has a certain amount of play back and forth. Now we got most of them out. Should be able to jerk this one up a little bit. Yeah. There it is. Okay, this is the thrust bearing. It's got bearing material on the sides that gives you your thrust of your crank back and forth. Now I'll remove the crank. These things sit so far in the block, they're kind of cantankerous to get out. You almost have to rotate them a little bit. Now we're going to get the camshaft out.
How do you do that, Jason?
Well, usually they slide right out. This one's probably got like an oil build-up ring, and you kind of like a crust. You got to get past that crust a little bit.
So what are you doing?
Well, it should pop right out, but it ain't wanting to budge for some reason. I'm just looking to see what's kind of, seems like it's in a bind. You know, there's nothing in there to hold it. Does not want to. There it goes. And when installing these, I'd be very careful not to nick a bearing. Now, since we're putting all new bearings in it, it doesn't matter. It's a tight bearing or something in it that's putting it in a bind. That's trash. On the 428 block, as we already verified, the A scratch on the back of the block. Part number C6ME-A is the correct part number for a 428 block, but that doesn't really indicate much of anything. These FE blocks can have any close to number. That could be, this could be a 390, this could even be a 352. The main thing is we can measure the bore with a dial caliper. And it's a 4.13. So this mics out exactly what a standard bore for 428 would be. Now it does have a ridge ring in it. I think 20 thousandths will clean this block up. There's no major gouges in it. There's no rust in it. So probably have to bore it a 20 over. But we do for sure have a 428 block.
We'll just go over here and open this door.
Confident we had our ducks in a row, we went to Barker Machine. Even though we had a 2 to 3 month wait just to get to the front of the line, Jason trusts this shop. They get all his business. What do we got there?
It's the rods and pistons. We won't use the pistons. We'll try to reuse the rods. And we may have to resize them, make them like new. 4-barrel intakes weigh about 75 pounds.
Yeah, all there.
We've weighed them before. On this 428, we're going to vat it, clean it, magnaflux it, make sure it's all in good shape. Then we'll bore the cylinders.
Once we get the oil pan off, we'll verify that the crank is the correct crank through the part number.
How's that crank look?
Shows a little bit of wear. Assuming it's standard, it should make it 10 thousandths, 1010. The heads have been redone, so we're just going to look them over and make sure that they fit our quality.